Hey everyone, good to see you again. Appreciate y'all joining us. This is Brant Frost again. Hope y'all having a great day. We've got a special treat today. It's my privilege to be joined by David Pietrusza, who is America's greatest and most prolific historian of American presidential politics and elections. There's the only really writer who would even be in his league would be Theodore White of Making of the Presidency series. And White's books, if I may say, read more like a journal of a liberal journalist, but rather than a history of a campaign. But David's books are gripping. They're fascinating. His background as a writer of sports biographies and has truly comes out in that he can tell a great story of great history, which is where his political beliefs do not color his work. So many books these days are written by people who you obviously know what side they're coming from. But with David's books, you're getting really great history, and rather than his commentary on whatever he thinks you need to know. You've probably seen him on Fox News, on Neil Cavuto, on several other programs, and you've probably seen his books in the stores because he's written some fantastic books about the 1920 election, the year of 6 presidents, the 1960 election, the year of 3 presidents, 1948, 1932. Excellent books all. I highly recommend them. And he's got a new book out, which is very relevant and covers an area of American history which is not noticed very much and has not had a lot of scholarship. 1936, his new book is about Franklin Roosevelt and the triumph of his liberal policies in 1936. It's out in all bookstores, available online. And I highly recommend you go to David's website, davidpietrusza.com, to get a copy directly. You might even be able to get an autographed copy. So with that, it's my privilege to welcome David to join us today. And I'd like to start by asking you to share about something that's very interesting that as I read the book, that I found a parallel to our modern situation. In 1935, when Franklin Roosevelt was preparing to run for re-election and had all these various forces of the right and the left opposing him, his allies in Congress and some in the Justice Department and the FBI and the IRS had some interesting ways on how to deal with his opponents. So tell us about some of the things that were done there, including, I believe, future Senator Hugo Black. Future Supreme Court Justice and current United States Senator Hugo Black of Alabama, who was involved in that. So tell us about that.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there was a book when I was far younger than I am now by a guy named Victor Lasky, who was a pretty active conservative and would do books on current figures, but he did a book called "It Didn't Start with Watergate." That there were things going on and dirty tricks, probably, probably somebody was hiding George Washington's false teeth on him, but what the Roosevelt administration was doing, and if I could jump back to one of my previous books on the 1932 election, is you found out that Herbert Hoover was employing the Office of Naval Intelligence to spy on people. So you had things like that going on in a nonpartisan way, but Roosevelt really ramps it up. He was very efficient politically. He was the master politician. He was a Machiavellian politician. He got it done at the polls. And what he does, as you alluded to, you've got the congressional investigations, and there were some highly charged investigations, one of which not really covered in the book because it didn't have to do with the election so much, was the Nye committee in the Senate. And what they were trying to do was to go after the munitions makers and the merchants of death. And it was a very isolationist period. In a way, it is connected, however, because among the merchants of death are the DuPont family, and which sold hundreds of millions of dollars of munitions to the Allies, and they emerge as the critics on the right in the Democratic sphere, the Democratic Party, against Roosevelt with the Liberty Lobby. So you've got that operation, and the Nye committee is also. I'm going to digress here because
for the benefit of people who may not be familiar, the Liberty Lobby was a group of
Liberty
business.
League.
Liberty League. Yes, the Liberty League. Tell us a bit about that in
Sure.
60 seconds. Tell folks about that so they'll know.
The Liberty League was founded around 1935, and the more conservative Democrats were getting pretty antsy about where the New Deal was going. And they were led by a fellow named John Jacob Raskob, who had been the Democratic national chairman when Al Smith was running and when Franklin Roosevelt was nominated. Franklin Roosevelt fires him right away. He was a big Al Smith man. He was such a big Al Smith man that when Al Smith needs a job after he loses for the presidency, Raskob makes him the manager of the Empire State Building at $50,000 a year, which is pretty good money for managing an empty office building in the middle of the Depression.
In the 1930s, that's good money.
That's big bucks. So anyway, Raskob and Smith and John W. Davis, who was a very conservative Democrat and ran against Calvin Coolidge in 1924. He got the nomination on that 103rd ballot as the compromise candidate after everybody had battled themselves to a standstill. So they are attacking Roosevelt from the right in the Democratic Party. They have a few former governors involved, and they've got some bucks. They issue a lot of papers and studies, but that's pretty much as far as it goes. What Roosevelt is able to do with them is to run against them because they're the rich guys. Those are the Wall Street guys. They've got the Silk Hats. They're the cartoon villains that he can run against, as he really has a sort of class warfare campaign. But the Black Committee, Hugo Black's committee, starts investigating not campaign finances, but what he's investigating is who gives money to what political groups. Now, really, what's it their business? And he only investigates anti-New Deal groups. He doesn't go after the American Federation of Labor or anything like that, or the NAACP, or anything else. But he goes after these groups. And what he proves, which is pretty startling, is that the people who make large contributions to political groups are wealthy. Yes, they are. How shocking. But what you do is you make these causes look dirty somehow by bringing up the money that is put out by one person or another. You also see this, not to make too deep a connection, but when you're reading the Communist Party press in the 1930s, you see this is a tactic that they use to say, aha, there's this amount of money being given by this person or that person. And so, it's all sinister. It's all very, very sinister. And then there is an investigation which Roosevelt triggers in the House of Representatives, which goes after Francis Townsend. Dr. Townsend had created a plan for old age pensions. Now, old age pensions were in the air. It was picking up steam in the 1920s. A bunch of states had instituted plans for this, but they were very, very modest. And none of the southern states, I believe, had any of them at that point. But the Democratic platform of 1932 said we're going to have essentially social security, old age pensions, but on a state level. And Townsend, on the basis of writing a letter to the editor in his local paper in California, it becomes a phenomenon. He's like the original internet phenomenon. He goes viral. And literally, millions of people support this plan. It's to give $200 a month to every old person on the condition that they don't work and that they spend the money like in 30 days. And he thinks, well, this will create more jobs for younger people. and there will be a velocity of money when this will, as the New Deal and as deficit spending creates, tries to prime the pump of the economy, this velocity of money was going to do this. Where there was a velocity of money, but it was largely into the coffers of the people organizing the Townsend Plan. It was economically unsound. How unsound was it, Johnny? It was so unsound that Franklin Roosevelt said it was unsound. And it was basically a regressive tax, a use tax. And every time there was a transaction with a product, say you had a pencil, and you'd get 2% of that value of the pencil, of the lead, would be taxed, and then the wood would be 2% more, and then the eraser would be, and then if you sharpened it, it would probably be 2%. And this could end up as a huge tax on everything that was going out. So Roosevelt hated this, and then this House of Representatives goes after Townsend and all his, I'll call them henchmen, but his aides, going back into the 1920s. Now, he had only started this plan a couple of years beforehand, but they start digging into the finances and bank accounts of his organizers going back to when they were living in Seattle around 1920. It's really heavy-handed and ham-fisted, so much so that Townsend is going to storm out of a congressional committee, and there will be a subpoena issued for him, and he will be I think convicted of here we go, something relevant today, convicted of contempt of Congress. And I will say this about
penalty.
What's that? Well, I don't know what the penalty was going to be, but Franklin Roosevelt eventually pardoned him. Of course, the man was so old; it was a little mercy was. It was a little mercy was in order, and plus Franklin Roosevelt had already won the election. So you had these, and then the going after people for taxes, where it starts with going after most nationally with Hoover and Calvin Coolidge's Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon. There's a real persecution of him. They start looking at William Randolph Hearst, the press baron's taxes, and they look at his mistress's taxes and returns. And they go after Huey Long. Huey Long is another disaffected Democrat. He's the senator from Louisiana. He's a big populist. He has another one of these unbalanced economic schemes, which is every man a king, and no man wears a crown, but it's going to be share our wealth. And so he's going to confiscate all holdings after a certain amount. Like after you've got $1 million, you're not going to have $2 million. It's going to be cut off of that. How that would always be held at that level, no one quite understood. And then there would be very confiscatory tax rates to give everyone huge lump sum payments and then income. I don't even think he believed in how it would work, but Roosevelt goes after him, and he really has henchmen down there doing his dirty work and going after them tax wise. Now, after Long is killed or assassinated in September 1935, his organization is going to make peace with the New Deal, and surprise, 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 all the charges are dropped against his pals and all their nefarious tax dodging.
So you're saying
there was an answer for you, but there was a question for me.
So you're saying that even 80 years ago, the people in power were using the tools of government to squeeze their political enemies?
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
And yet another parallel to today, or a reminder of today. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt institutes something called the Import-Export Bank, and it's to ramp up exports. Not so much imports, but But, you know, these countries abroad, they don't have any money either. So they can't buy our stuff. So what's Washington going to do? We're going to lend them the money. We're going to make it possible for these guys to get their hands on our stuff. And one of the things that a foreign nation wants to get their hands on, and it's not a good foreign nation, it's Joe Stalin's government in Moscow, and they want to purchase 50 aircraft from a big manufacturer in the United States, commercial aircraft. Well, they really don't want commercial aircraft. They want to convert these things into bombers. Remember the Nye Committee. Remember how we were going against armaments, how we were all pacifistic. Well, the Nye Committee learned that Franklin Roosevelt's son, Elliot, was going to broker this deal at a commission of $500,000. Now, eventually it falls through because I think Joe Stalin understood the value of a ruble and that this was not a good deal. And the deal falls through. But the Nye Committee sat on this information for 2 years, from 1930 for about 1934 on to October 1936, did nothing with it. It finally broke in an aircraft industry magazine. The Nye Committee says, oh, nothing to see here. And also that 5-member taxes and investigating people. There was a $5,000 fee, which Elliot Roosevelt collected before the deal fell through, which was not reported on his income taxes. But the Nye Committee said, well, the deal fell through, so nothing to investigate.
So the president's son is brokering deals with communist regimes overseas, and it gets swept under the rug. My goodness, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Yes. My goodness, it really is amazing, and I recommend everyone get a copy of David's new book, FDR's 1936 Landslide and the Triumph of the Liberal Ideal. It really is amazing how not only the parallels that you'll read in this book, you'll also see how if you look it up in a history book or Google it, go to Wikipedia, you'll see in 1936, Roosevelt had this enormous landslide. But most people at the time did not expect it to be a landslide. Even the more optimistic people in Roosevelt's orbit did not expect him to win such a colossal majority in either the popular vote or the electoral vote. And you'll see as you read this book that it was not inevitable that Roosevelt was going to win by such a huge majority. And in our next interview, I want to talk to David about some of the more interesting forces that were pulling for both the left and the right and against Roosevelt. And unlike today, when you have two parties that are pretty much firmly entrenched, one in the right, one in the left, in the 1930s, both parties had their left and right wings. So Roosevelt was battling opposition from his left and from his right at the same time. So everyone get this book. Go to davidpietrusza.com or any place where good books are sold. That's David, Pietrusza.com. And thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you soon.